Back when we first started talking about doing this series months ago, we thought we need to do something to help people learn to be able to communicate without shutting down and with being able to hold one another in respect, in high regard. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, you want to do this series in October? We need to do the series now.
Right.
And I was afraid that by the time October rolled around, we wouldn't need it anymore, or it would sort of have lost its impact, or people would have just kind of been fatigued with all the arguing and just, let sleeping dogs lay. Do you feel like that's the case nowadays? Like things have improved? Or do you feel like, no, this topic is as relevant now as it is?
I think that the need for honest, open dialogue and communication has been there and will always be there. It feels like in today's society, within the church, within our community, even within our own families, has been strained by the issues of the day, whatever those are. But I think that the need has always been there. And I think today it's just highlighted and exacerbated so that people have got to relearn or perhaps maybe be reminded of how important it is to be in relationship with someone exclusive of what their expressed views are on any given topic. And it's possible and desirable even to be in those relationships and to have solid relationships, even in the face of disagreement on issues. As the saying goes, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's incredibly important. And it's a skill set that I think has perhaps been eroded in recent times, but we need to be reminded and relearn that quite a bit.
What you say, it sort of triggers an idea that I hadn't thought of before. So you're already learning on me a little bit here. It's not that we just need to flip a switch and decide we're going to stop behaving a certain way or doing a certain thing. It's a skill that needs to be learned.
Absolutely. It is a skill set. It's a practice, just like communication is a skill set you constantly need to hone in a marriage relationship or any relationship if it's to flourish and prosper. And I think the problem that we sometimes run into is we simply forget to do that because it becomes convenient and strangely comfortable to be in conflict with someone because of a particular issue. And we forget that the real important goal is not resolution necessarily of the issue at hand, but the relationship that's before us. And if we forget that, we do ourselves a disservice. And as professing Christians, we've missed the gospel message if we sacrifice the relationship for the issue.
You may have pre-answered my question here, my first official question, and that is that, being a good listener, good communication, accepting differences, opinions, these are not Christian exclusives, right?
No, they are certainly not, right?
So how do you think your faith in Jesus, following these, how do you think that offers a unique perspective in this, trying to learn to communicate better?
So I think the Christian as a communicator has a special role in our society. It's about demonstrating or modeling consistent, caring behavior. You can find a whole bunch of folks who are strong communicators, but actually operate in the role of advocacy and who have an objective to win a particular argument or a particular issue. I think as a Christian, our role is to not necessarily try to drag people to our way of thinking or drag them over the line to another approach to an issue, but to truly demonstrate how to dive deeply into the relationship with those individuals and establish that as our primary goal. And I think that's the difference between how our faith informs us. It's the goal, not necessarily the skill or the practice, but what's the goal? And ultimately the goal is to grow and foster and prosper that relationship, and to hopefully demonstrate that in such a way so that it reflects well and on not only on us, but it reflects well on our Savior as well.
Okay, great, and I appreciate that. Just hearing you say, hey, caring for people is above the whole, sort of the umbrella over good communication. Because we've got a lot of people who are honing their ability to communicate, but they're actually causing divide.
Right.
They're not showing care. That's where we need to be. Okay. As you're going through the living room conversations with your small group, I'm asking about particular experiences in this. How do you, sort of when you're learning to appreciate new perspectives coming from different people, how do you know that you're growing in those scenarios? Like, what does growth look like for you?
So in the living room conversations, our small group started off with what I would call non-controversial, easy topics to begin to practice the skill set of listening, not interrupting, not attempting to advocate for or convince anyone else on a special issue. As we got more comfortable in the practice, we moved on to tougher issues, frankly, like abortion, the state of American policing, things like that have high quotients of controversy or high in emotional rhetoric in society attached to those. I think we understood from the get-go that the growth was going to come when we were able individually to have those conversations with people that we cared about at the outset. We cared about them, and we were able to receive those different perspectives without judgment. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that we always agreed with one another on a particular issue. But it did mean that we were able to develop that ability to accept what the other individual was saying without placing them in a box or a category of somehow less than ourselves because their perspective was different. It also enabled us to hear stories, personal stories from one another on what actually influenced our thinking on one of those particular issues. And those were, I think, among the most important things we learned, because it gives you insight into how a person's thought processes and their beliefs, their value sets were formed, not just in a week or a month or a year, but over a lifetime. And many of those stories from my friends, our friends, I had never heard before. And it changed perspective about the individual. That alone is worth the effort, the intentionality of listening to people and not judging them as they're speaking or as they're, articulating their position on a particular issue. And I think that's what growth looks like. The ability to desire to be in relationship with that person and have their best interest at heart, irrespective of what issue, position they may be taking.
Can you even speak specifically for yourself? Before this started, I kind of was like this, and then after we went through this is an area of growth for me, specifically. If we get to a touchy thing and you don't want to answer that, that's okay too. Like if you say, Tyler, I don't want to answer that, or it's too personal or whatever.
Yeah, no, it isn't too personal. So I think for me the change did not come in perspective or positions on certain, controversial issues like abortion or policing, or we had a few others as well. And honestly, that's not the purpose
Right.
of a holy conversation or of the platform that we call living room conversations. I think where I not changed, but was reminded, reinforced, called to account, was honing the ability not to jump in and push back when I disagreed. The ability to have people complete an entire thought or share an entire story without having to respond in any way, and just frankly leave the conversation and sit with that information was a huge change. In my business life, I'm not used to spending a lot of time, without getting to a goal of achieving something in a conversation, just receiving information without having to process and turn it around and respond back. This reminded me that that is not the goal of a holy conversation. The holy conversation goal is really to deepen the relationship with the individual and to understand that we can exist and prosper and thrive in relationship with people who we have absolute vehement disagreement on issues with. And you know what? That's a tremendously freeing thing too. If nothing else, it expands your circle of friends greatly. And that's a tremendous value.
That's exactly what I'm looking for, Kevin. Not that I think the what you're saying is the point isn't to change somebody's mind, and that's not even an indicator of growth. Indicator of growth is before I have to practically sit on my hands not to interrupt and to jump in and say, but did you think about this, and offer the counter. Growth means I'm learning how to communicate in a new way, so.
Yeah, and it was really helpful too. My natural tendency is to do more talking than listening, because that's what I kind of do for a living. This reminded me that there is a whole other skill set that is necessary for authentic relationship, and that listening skill, that ability to take in and process without response, it's invaluable. I mean, it's an integral part of what we should be about in our faith journey.
You're giving me some great sermon ideas, because I'm preaching one of these weeks.
Well, good.
Is there a particular slogan or mantra or thought process or tip that you could give to anyone wanting to grow in their ability to have meaningful conversations with someone who thinks differently than they do?
Yeah, I think for each of us, Tyler, it is difficult to withhold our responses when we disagree. And I think in part that's because we sometimes believe that if we don't speak up, it's acquiescence or it's confirmation that the person's position is something that we believe is right or that we agree with. So I think when people consider what holy conversations or living room conversations look like, and how to do that effectively, one of the best tips to take away is, one, practice the fine art of listening without interrupting, even if you do have to sit on your hands and stop yourself. The second thing is practice the mental discipline of withholding judgment because you simply disagree with the position they're taking. And then I think third, and most importantly, in those conversations, even when you do disagree, don't be afraid to express compassion and understanding of the person's position and the things in their life that led them to hold the views, the values, or the opinions that they do. Because in all likelihood, they're a lot different than mine. And I tend to, and I think we all do, look at the world through the lens of my own experience, forgetting sometimes that the experience of others is markedly different than I had.
As you have, okay, maybe this is maybe a simple one. How would you normally respond when someone, oh, that's not how I want to ask this. How would you normally respond when someone challenged your thoughts or beliefs? If someone sort of,
You mean outside of this platform, not?
Yeah, well, I'll just ask the full question, and then
Okay.
if something comes to mind, and if not, that's fine too. How would you normally respond when challenged on your thoughts and beliefs, and how do you feel that's changed in light of this training?
Okay, sure. So I think that when most of us are challenged on an issue or an expressed opinion or a thought, our natural tendency, certainly my natural tendency, is to jump to a quick and spirited defense. Why? Because you're challenging not only my idea, but my own understanding of my personal worth, and in some cases, perhaps my intellect or my qualifications or a combination of any of those things. So jumping to a spirited defense is sort of a natural response. The living room conversation practice reminded me that we can learn a lot more and make a lot more progress when we stop doing that, grabbing hold of that natural tendency, and just listen to have the person complete their full thought. Most of what I hear in the initial pushback on an idea of mine is just that, initial pushback. It's usually later in the conversation that I get to understand what lies behind the pushback. But if you jump to an immediate defense, you honestly never get there. And that's a problem, because you never really find what's really behind, the difference in perspective here. It's only when you decide that you're going to enter into a deeper part of the relationship with that person that they begin to unfurl some of the things that are driving their thought processes and their opinions. And that was a big reminder for me, I think, in living room conversations. It's really hard to, I might say, to sit there and be quiet and not jump, especially when you're challenged. But if you can master that skill, or at least stumble your way through it, it's a huge benefit.
Okay, great. When you, sort of as you've grown through this process, think of a time where someone said something that triggered you, or maybe even offended you. How did you deal with it in the moment? Mm-hmm. And then, have you ever had to come back and have a follow-up conversation, or ask for forgiveness, or how did you deal with sort of the aftermath of that?
So I think during living room conversations, and thinking back even on other conversations prior to us testing out this platform, I can recall plenty of times where I felt triggered or offended or just, how could this person think that way, as sort of a first out-of-the-box response. There have been plenty of times when I've concluded a conversation, particularly after, pushing back hard against a person's thoughts, where I said, geez, I wish I had that to do over. I wish I wouldn't have said that. So there's a moment of confession and conviction there. I think, for most of us. And I think I'd be surprised if there was a single person on the face of the earth who didn't have that experience. I've also had plenty of times in my life where I've had to go back to people, including my own children and family, business associates and others, and apologize for the way that I responded. I hope what practicing living room conversations or holy conversations has done is remind me that I can be a lot happier and feel a lot less guilty by simply restraining my pushback and my thoughts and watching the words I use and the counsel that I offer. Too quick to push back, too quick to respond, hardly ever works out well. And I've also been reminded, I think, during the process that there are many things that I can think, but if I can cultivate the discipline to stop them from coming out of my mouth, I'm generally going to be in a much better position, both in relationship with the person that I'm talking with and understanding of the issue at hand. Again, so fast from time to time to jump to that spirited defense. It just continues to be, something that causes more regret than it does growth.
Okay. My last question here, you've already answered probably a half dozen times, so we'll just skip it. So I think this is great, Kevin, and I'm super excited for this because you guys have paved the way for us a little bit. And the thing that you have said this afternoon that has stuck out to me the most that I hadn't considered before is that you said that the goal is not to win an argument.
Right.
The goal is to grow in our relationships. And the arguments are, at least in this scenario, are the things that are getting in the way.
They do.
Like if you can't learn to navigate tough conversations, then your relationship is threatened. And I think that's where we're at right now.
Tyler, I agree. I think the nature of what passes today for dialogue sometimes with people that we otherwise would profess to love and cherish and care for has really gotten in the way of growing relationships. I've thought back from time to time over, difficult relationships and conversations I've witnessed and been a part of in my own extended family. And I always remind myself, maybe just a little bit darkly or morbidly, that I don't know anybody that ever stood by the graveside of a loved one and said, I won that argument. But I've had plenty of people say, I wish the relationship would have been something different. And so we sometimes misvalue the issue or the argument and grossly undervalue relationship. And in my mind, as a Christian, as a human being, that's just a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy.
Especially as it pertains to the gospel, what do we have if we have no relationships?
Isn't relationship our purpose?
Exactly. Like, what do we have? We have information.
Yes, I can get that on email. Yes, yeah, you're right. I agree 100%. The relationship is the objective.